yeah, I did a calculation the other day. It's just coming up to 23 years.
23 years.
So that alone is scary enough.
Okay. I first met Andrew when myself and Peter were organising a short film called Dead Air. We decided crazily to use puppets, and then us on our Twitter campaign we found Andrew, and then obviously found out that Andrew's done tons of stuff. So we just thought we'd invite him down here today just to talk about puppetry in TV and film, talk about some of your experiences on sets of some of these, amazing films like Muppets Treasure Island, Muppets Most Wanted, 101 Dalmatians, and other stuff. But we want to talk about what our favourite puppets are in movies and TV over the last 30, 40 years that have, maybe influenced you, influenced me to a certain extent. So we'll just kick off with you. You might as well just talk about...
Where would you like me to start, Jeff?
Well, from the beginning would be a good place, Andrew.
From the beginning, okay. I was born in... No, that would take way too long. I think my love of puppetry, if that's what you want to know about, it kind of stemmed from the fact that I was born in the 70s, which was the perfect spot to be born, early 70s, because it meant that when I was hitting kind of 6, 7, 8 years old, Star Wars was just coming out. The Muppet Show had been on television. The Muppet movies were just coming out, and so my entire life as a kid revolved around Star Wars, Doctor Who, the Muppets, and all of these movies that kind of came out really starting in the late 70s through the 80s. All this kind of great spurt of practical creature effects movies, which obviously we don't get so much now. And so, I was clearly fascinated by it as a technique. I loved monsters, I loved creatures, but it all seemed so distant and far away. I mean, how do you even begin to do something like this as a career or as a profession? So it was a hobby. It was just something I was interested in, watching these movies, but I really didn't think about doing it as a career, because who would, quite frankly. And something like the Muppets, which was, I don't think people remember quite how revolutionary it was at the time. A puppet show that isn't just for kids, that is prime time on a, I think it was on ITV. I can't remember. I think it might have been I can't remember the ad breaks. That's interesting. And now with things like you've got Netflix that are producing shows like, well, you've got things like The Simpsons, Futurama, Rick and Morty. So the idea of a cartoon being for an adult audience is fairly commonplace now. But back then, puppet show for adults, that's kind of weird. So anyway, I grew up watching that, and it was colourful, it was bright, and it just seemed so distant from anything that I could possibly achieve. Little did I know that it was all shot in Elstree, which was literally 20 minutes drive from where I grew up. But I just assumed it was being filmed in America. So it stayed there as a hobby, and I kind of moved into acting. I went into the acting profession. I went to drama school at Guildford for 3 years, went to GSA. And at the end of that 3-year period, I just came to this realisation that I really like performing, but I hate being in front of people. So if I sound nervous, it's because I'm doing this. If I was underneath something, putting on a silly voice, I'd be absolutely fine, but this is me. So it was like, what do I do? How do I square that? I enjoy performing, but I like being hidden. And so I thought, well, there's puppetry. What about that? And bizarrely, a friend of mine, I can't remember why, but he had the address for the Jim Henson Creature Shop, which used to be based in Camden at that point. And I just wrote them a letter, cold. If I was to go back in time and tell myself what to do, I wouldn't have written that letter. It was a horrendous letter. It was the worst kind of letter. I think I even filled it with glitter, right? Because I was like, they won't forget me when they open this letter and get glitter all over them, thinking, they'll love that. Obviously they did, thank God, because I sent the letter off and I didn't hear anything back. And then just out of the blue, about 3 months later, I got a phone call from a guy saying, hi, this is so-and-so from the Creature Shop. And I was like, yeah, we're holding some auditions, would you like to come along? So I was like, okay, this is exciting. So I had to get some time off of college to go to this audition that they wouldn't let me, because they said that it was pointless. So I pulled a sickie, and I went to London and I did the first audition. Now the first audition was probably about 2 minutes long. There was a room of about 50 of us. I think they were seeing in that first day, they saw about 500 people. And essentially what they did is they lined you up and you held up your hand and you counted from 1 to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Great, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out, you're in, you're out. And what they were looking for then was the 2 syllables and 7. 7. 7. So if you just did that automatically, 7, rather than going 7, you got through to the next round. If you just did 7, sorry, you're out. So I got through to the next round, and out of that 500, they picked, I think, about 30 of us. There was about 30 of us, and we went through a 3-week kind of Muppet boot camp, which was run by Kevin Clash, who used to play Elmo, and some other stalwarts from the Creature Shop in London. And it was a bit like the puppet version of X Factor in that you kind of got through the day, they put you through various exercises, and then they would read a list out at the end of the day, and if the name got read out, you came back for the next day, and then you came back for the next day, and this went on for 2 weeks. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, there was 6 of us left, and they said, congratulations, you've made it this far, you go through to the 3rd week, which is much more based on character and creating characters and subtleties and that kind of thing. So I was lucky, I got through that, and really after that 3-week period, they started using me, just in dribs and drabs. I was way down on the list of people that they used, so if somebody got ill at the last minute, I would get called in to do a commercial and stuff like that. But what I didn't know was that audition process, they were gearing up to do Muppet Treasure Island in 1995, that would have been. And really what they were doing is they were just looking for a pool of people to use, because up until that point they had all kinds of people that they'd used before, but they'd kind of become so successful, they were going off and doing their own things, they were running their own companies, so they needed to find new people. So I was doing a tour of Romeo and Juliet, a theatre and education tour in North Wales, and I got a phone call saying, could you be at Shepton Studios on Monday? This was the beginning of April '95, and I was like, yes. Luckily, because the tour finished on the Friday, I got in the car, I drove down and I started on Muppet Treasure Island on the Monday. And that first week, we did all of the stuff in the movie that is Kermit arriving at the port, the ship, they're all getting on the boat, basically. And if you look at that stuff now, and you can finally see me now it's on HD. Because when it was in DVD, you can see I'm like way right at the back, because they stuck me as far away from the camera as humanly possible, which is fair enough, because it was my first one. And after that first week, I was like, that's great. I've had a week on a Muppet movie. It doesn't get much better than that. And that was it as far as I was concerned. And I was just heading to drive home when the production manager came up to me and he said, can I have a quick word, Andy? And me being me, I was like, oh God, what have I done? I'm going to get fired. I'm never going to get used again. But he came up to me and said, I think we might be able to offer you about 10 weeks' work if you're interested, which is what I really liked. If you're interested. At which point I tried to play it cool and said, yeah, I'll just check my diary. It was completely empty. Yeah, I think I'll be free. And yeah, I ended up in it for the whole run, which was in the end turned out to be about 6 months, because it went a bit over time and over budget. But it was my training ground. That's pretty much where I learned everything, because as I said, I started right at the back, doing background characters, and as the shoot progressed, I kind of got moved a bit further forward until I ended up assisting Kevin Clash, who was at that time, he was playing Piggy and Fozzie, because although Frank Oz was still involved at that point, he was starting to pull away slightly. So we only had him there for about 3 weeks. And actually, yes, when Frank came over for 3 weeks, they kind of pushed me in his direction, and I was his assist for 3 weeks. Again, the best training ground I could ever possibly have.
So when you were with Frank Oz, what were you doing with Frank?
Well, it was pretty labour intensive, because we were trying to get all the main scenes done with Kermit, Piggy, all the important scenes. And we were also shooting a lot of content for Muppet CD-ROM. They were doing a CD-ROM just generally of the Muppets, and another one for Muppet Treasure Island, none of which I've seen actually. So they were trying to cram all that stuff in. So 1 minute we'd be on the set doing a scene with Tim Curry, next minute they'd drive us across and it would just be blue screen stuff. But for the majority of the time with Frank, I was his left hand. So right hand. He's got Fozzie head, and I'm doing the right hand, which when you start with Frank, what he does is you put your hand in the glove and his other hand comes and does that, and it just basically means you're not moving, you're not doing anything, you just stay right there until I feel comfortable with you. But after a while, he didn't actually speak to me for the first week. That was the other thing. He didn't speak to me, barely made eye contact, and I just thought every day I was like, this is it, this is the day I'm going to get fired. But I survived, and after that he loosened up, and he was actually really good and really generous with his advice. But yeah, I mean, it was a real baptism by fire, and the benefit for me was as soon as that finished, it's pure luck in a way, in that once you've got the Muppets on your CV, it just opens doors for you as a puppeteer, because it's like, oh well, if they've used him, then he must know what he's doing. So I was lucky in that sense that first job enabled me to go on and do things like I was at Spitting Image for a bit, and various other little TV shows, because they just look through and just go, oh, Muppets. And to this day, my Twitter feed, really, people aren't interested in the other puppet stuff I do. They're like, oh yeah, Newzoids, that's great. Anyway, so tell us about the Muppets. And it's like, no, okay. And and it's nice, but I don't really, the Muppet stuff only arrives, especially in this country now, every 5 or 6 years they maybe come over and do something. And sometimes they don't. I got a phone call the other day saying we may be doing a shoot for Sainsbury's, a commercial. Would you be free? So I was like, God, yes, absolutely. It didn't happen in the end. So, it's just like an actor's life. You're just freelance. You just go from job to job to job to job.
Well, we were originally just going to talk about TV, film, puppetry.
Yes.
In that. I know when we discussed over the phone what we were going to do, we were going to pick out, you were going to pick out some of your key moments in the timeline of history.
Sure.
Key puppets that
Absolutely.
Influenced you. Now we were going to project this on the screen here, but the problem is...
I'm rubbish.
No. Technology has let us down, so we've got a tiny little screen at the front.
I shall bring it round to all of you individually, one at a time.
So I thought, let's just talk about the first character you wanted to talk about from Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah. Oh, I'm ahead of you. Okay. I was going to go for the other one, but no, we can do Close Encounters.
Well, I thought if we start at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Whenever I do things like this, and I've done a few chats now, people go, "What are your favourite creatures?" And usually it's the same ones over and over again for very good reason. People always mention E.T., Yoda, Jabba the Hutt. They're the classic creatures that everybody remembers from their childhood. So what I wanted to do was talk about very briefly the ones that meant something to me but don't get discussed that often, that you don't see. In the first one, I don't know if you can see this, I might show you a clip in a minute. That's Steven Spielberg there. And this is from the set of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And it was a puppet designed by a guy called Carlo Rambaldi, who went on to design E.T. And you can kind of see the genesis of E.T. and the character. It's got a long neck. I won't show you the clip because it's fairly short. But the reason I liked it is because when you go and watch it in the movie, yeah, it's fairly crude. Franois Truffaut, I've forgotten the name of the character, comes out, and it's one of the last aliens you see. He walks out of the ship, and they do the hand tone signal, and it repeats it back. Now, it's kind of crude in the movie. You can see the mechanics in the hand. It's a little jerky, and the head's there's a bit of this going on, and that's obviously the constraints of the technology. But it does two wonderful things that, as a puppeteer, you're always kind of striving for. There's a moment after it's done the hand signal where it looks at Truffaut's character dead center and smiles. And it smiles and its whole face lights up. And what I like about that is it's very, very simple. It's actually quite a crude puppet. I think it's got an eye blink and it's got this mechanism in its mouth to make it smile, and that's probably about it. But it's effective and it does the job. And then there's another cut back to it where it's looking at the human character, and it's kind of got this look of awe in its face. It's kind of just looking at us because we're just as weird to him as it is to us. And it's like, how do you do that? How do you do that as a puppeteer and as a puppet designer? How do you imbue the character, what is essentially rubber and plastic and mechanics, with a sense of wonder? It's the same thing that I've got some animator friends that I talk to, and like, how do you get that sense of awe and wonder into an animated character? Do you get you draw really hard on the pen to make it. No, it's something else. It's a mixture of the way it's shot, the way it's built, and the way it's performed by the puppeteers. Now, this puppeteer, I did a bit of research on it last night. As simple as it is, had 12 performers. So you've got 12 performers all working in sync to try and get one performance out of your character. And that's another thing which I think that people don't realise as much these days. Something like E.T., this creature, any practical creature has at least, I would say a minimum of 4 puppeteers. I recently did a pilot for Jerry Anderson's son. And it's a Thunderbirdsy kind of show with puppets, rod puppets with animatronic heads. So what you've got is you've got 3 puppeteers actually physically on the puppet, one doing the head, one doing the arms, one doing the legs, and then you've got another puppeteer operating the eyes, and then you're miming to a click track. So you've got to get all those people and you've got to get them working in sync, because otherwise the puppets end up doing all kinds of weird things. And this is again why you find a lot of puppeteers, we tend to work with the same people. And it's not, we have been accused of it being in a bubble and nepotism and stuff like that. And it is and it isn't. It's once you find a group of people that you click with and you work with, then you bring them onto a project because it just saves a lot of time. Part of the problem with using puppets on films nowadays is that there's no lead-in time, whereas when we did Muppet Treasure Island, we had a 3-month rehearsal period before we even went on set. Now, I'm about to start something next month. I think we get 2 weeks. So I mean, that's no time really to get a group of people together and getting them to gel as a unit. But yeah, that's my first one.
Okay, so let's move on to your second one.
My second one is one that, again, I won't show you the picture because it's one we all know, which is Chewbacca. Now, in all the documentaries that I've watched, there's a brilliant one out there actually at the moment which I recommend for anybody who's into movie puppetry. It's called The Frankenstein Complex, which is about people like Rick Baker and Stan Winston. It's brilliant. Chewbacca always tends to get forgotten, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's because it's that mix of a human performer and, I'm going to say an animatronic head, but I don't even think it's that complicated. The thing about Chewie is why I like him again is he's so expressive. There's a moment in Empire Strikes Back where they close the doors and leave Han Solo out in the cold, and he's leaning up against the Millennium Falcon and he's crying because he thinks he's never going to see him again. There's actually no movement in the face in that section at all. It's all down to the performer. And the mask that they built, the original one, I don't know so much about the new one, but certainly the original one, really all it did was open and close. And that's really all it does. And now you think about Chewbacca and you think about him as a character. He's so much more than that. You know, he's funny, he's big, he's powerful, he can be aggressive, he almost makes jokes at times. And yet it's just a guy in a furry costume with a mouth that does that. Again, that's the beauty of the design, and it's the beauty of the performer inside. And it's also something I wanted to talk about with puppetry, is the idea that things don't need to be complicated. This is, and I don't want this to turn into a I hate CG conversation because I don't, but I think with the advent of computer-generated technology and being able to do essentially anything that you want on screen now, there is this tendency for people to do absolutely anything that they want. And I don't know, I think that almost restricts creativity. When you've got the opportunity to do anything and you do anything, it's kind of over-egging it. I went to see Valerian recently, the new Luc Besson film, and really what that guy just needed was an editor to just go, do you really think, Luke? I mean, I actually quite enjoyed it. It was quite an entertaining movie, but it's too much. It's just too noisy, and the problem I had is that I didn't know where I was supposed to be looking on the screen. There is so much going on that you end up getting kind of dizzy. I didn't even see it in 3D. I refused to see it in 3D because I thought I'll just get motion sickness. But because there's so much going on, because they can fill every inch of the screen with something, then they do. And I think something's been lost because with the restrictions of the technology that we had in the 70s and 80s, that certain key decisions had to be made, which is why Jaws is such an amazing movie, because you don't see the shark that often, which is why Alien, the first movie, is such a good movie, because you don't see the alien that much compared to the new ones, because it leaves that much more to your imagination. Also builds up tension in a way that these movies, where they show the whole creature, boom, gone, well, there's no tension left. And also when you restrict filmmakers, directors, even any kind of artist, painter, musician, whatever, if you restrict them in some way, you say you can't do this, artists are by their very nature devious. We'll find a way around it to do what we want. It might not be the technique that we would have liked to have used, but we'll get to the result that we want via a different route. And I think that's kind of what's missing with CG these days.
Because you can just do whatever you want.
Yeah, and I think sometimes they get so caught up in the idea of we can do anything that they don't think whether they should or not. It's why, for instance, I prefer the Lord of the Rings.
Wasn't it?
Oh, was it?
Yeah.
All right. See, it's just ingrained. I am Jeff Goldblum. But it's that. Yeah, it's restraint. It's why the Lord of the Rings movies are better than The Hobbit. The technology had moved on, and in The Hobbit everything just felt bigger, but somehow it felt less realistic, and I didn't buy into it. And the same when I went to see, was it Warcraft? The one that David Bowie's son directed. Again, because they can do anything, they create these huge vistas, but there's just a part of my brain which is going, that's just not physically possible, I don't care. Even in a fantasy environment, it's just, I don't know, something about the grit under the fingernails, there's something just missing for me. Which is why it's interesting again that there's been a resurgence in practical effects now, thanks to J.J. Abrams. I know J.J. Abrams gets lots of pats on the back for that, but I also think the main one is Guillermo del Toro, who's done some amazing things to prove that prosthetics and puppetry can still be a valid tool in a filmmaker's toolbox.
No, sure.
Why don't you choose?
Sorry?
Why don't you choose one?
Oh, no. Well, let's go to your third one. Well, because
we've kind of skipped about a bit. The third one is just one, again, it's one that doesn't get spoken about a lot. Let me bring her up here. You probably saw her when you came in. Which is Ugra from The Dark Crystal. Just because she's beautiful. She's beautiful. I mean, look at the sculpt detail on that. I will hold this up so you can see it a little bit. I mean, she's absolutely gorgeous, and I don't care how good CG gets. It's not quite at that level yet. And the thing that I love about this, I was watching it again the other day, is it's the one puppet that I forget is a puppet occasionally. I'm watching the whole sequence, and my brain kind of tricks me into believing that it's a prosthetic, that it's somebody in a costume with an animatronic mask or something, and it's not. It is a complete Muppet puppet. Frank Oz was underneath it with his hand up a bump, operating the hands with another team of, I think there was about 5 or 6 operating the face, and her eye came out, she could take her eye out and look and put the eye back in and stuff like this. And yet
I always found that moment amazing because the eye still moves.
Yes.
Pulls the eye out, it's still moving, and then pops it back in. You see it spin round and start looking, and how they did that is just incredible.
It's astonishing, and every time I see it, I just think it's an actor in prosthetics. And I have to step back and go, no, it's a completely fabricated puppet. There's plenty of footage on YouTube of Frank operating Augra. I can't pronounce her name. But yeah, I mean, she's always been one of my favourites. And again, a puppet that people very rarely talk about. Also, I think Dark Crystal, people forget again how revolutionary that movie was. Nobody had ever done a movie that was entirely puppet-based. No human characters at all. I think in the heart of the public, I think Labyrinth is probably more beloved because it's got David Bowie in it, which is fair enough. And Jennifer Connelly. I'm still in love with her. It's fine. But it's got that Muppet sense of humour. It's written by Terry Jones, so it's kind of wacky, and there is some great puppetry in there. But I go back and watch The Dark Crystal, watch some clips on YouTube. I maintain that there is stuff in there that has never been bettered. Never. And again, up against all the technical difficulties that they had when they made that in the late 70s, which was, you know, very little of it was remote control RC. A lot of it was just cable operated. So you go and watch the behind the scenes footage of like the Skeksis doing the sword fight over Crystal, and you've got the Skeksis there with the form rings swinging the sword, and then you've got like 6 or 7 people with cables all running behind it like this and trying not to get trodden on. And it's that. I love it. I absolutely adore it. And more people need to talk about the Dark Crystal, I think.
Absolutely. But I mean, whilst we're talking about Dark Crystal, one of the things, and you touched on Labyrinth,
Yeah.
one of my favourite puppets was always Ludo, because it's huge. I always wondered how the hell they puppet Ludo. I mean, it's just so big. I mean, there is a guy inside there, or two, I don't know.
There were 2 guys. They weren't in there at the same time. They swapped out simply because it was such a huge puppet. It would be too much for one puppeteer.
But it's just the size, the enormity of it. Always used to leave me, in wonder. I think, Christ, how did they do that?
And I think that's another aspect to it. I recently went to see a show in London that a friend of mine was doing at the Young Vic. It was a short 20-minute show designed for schools, kind of like an Alice in Wonderland fantasy adventure where a little girl in an orphanage finds a little creature and helps to try and get it away, escape the orphanage. And one of the things that they did once the show was over is that they would bring the creature out and the kids could interact with it. They could come up on the stage and they could pat it and they could, you know, it would mirror what they were doing and things like that. And that's missing, you know, with modern technologies. The fact that the kids were there, they were interacting with it in real time.
Yeah.
It was reacting to them, making them laugh. They were making it laugh. And at one point, it was quite amusing actually. One of the kids, who was probably, I think he's probably about 10 or 11, went up and, you know, patted this little dragon-like creature on the head, and then looked up at one of the puppeteers and went, "Is it real?" And you're like, well, yeah, absolutely, it's completely real. If you just buy into it in this environment right now, yeah, it's absolutely real. And again, when I actually dropped out of the business for a while in the mid-noughties, partly because puppets kind of fell out of fashion a little bit, and there wasn't really much stuff getting built and getting made. And I went into social care for a while, and I worked with kids with autism spectrum disorders. And I brought puppets into the mix, and puppets are a fantastic tool for therapists and carers to use with kids on the autistic spectrum, because it helps teach them cues, emotional cues. And because they're completely neutral, they don't give off confusing signals. So that was interesting, being able to take my puppetry and use it in a completely different context.
And on that note, me and Andrew and Peter, we went to Sci-Fi Wales, a Comic-Con in Wales, to promote this short film that we made a couple of weeks ago called Dead Air. And we brought one of our puppets along with us, which we have here.
Let's get Dave out.
Should we get Dave out?
Dave, I should just point out, Dave fell apart during the course of the filming. So he's looking, his ears, you see what I mean? We got a bit rough with him, unfortunately.
But Andrew sat there at this stall at Sci-Fi Wales and just brought the character to life.
Oh, I feel like
and we didn't have to say anything because everyone was talking to the puppet.
Hi. How you go? Yeah, he's in a bit of a mess. He's got a rip in his neck here, which I've just noticed, and the inside of his mouth is falling apart.
It's a bit of a stunt.
Yeah,
actually.
Puppets need to be, and sometimes puppet builders forget this, they get tied up in making them as clever as possible, and actually what they need to be is really robust and simple, because we will ask things of them on the set that they were never really designed to do, to be honest. I mean, there were moments on, well, certainly on Dead Air and other things that I've worked on, where the director comes up to you like this and goes, "Andrew, what if," and you just go white, and you're just like, "Oh God, what's he going to ask me?" Okay, yes, we can do that, but I don't think.
Were there any moments like that in Dead Air? Where I said, "Can we do this?"
Not really. I'll tell you what I did enjoy about working on Dead Air. Sit here, Dave. He's called Dave, by the way. Just in case.
They're
all called Dave. Hello, Dave. What I enjoyed most about Dead Air, especially, was the fact that you've never worked with puppets before.
No.
And I've worked on music videos, promos, all kinds of things with directors that haven't worked with puppets before, and unfortunately some of them think they know more than you do. I'm not saying that, it can be tricky sometimes because they say, I want it to do this, and you just look at the situation and you go, it's just not physically possible. Well, you're the puppeteer. So yeah, I know. That's what I'm telling you. It's not physically. We can maybe try and do this, and that will get us to that. There have been arguments in the past, but what I liked about working with Jeff on Dead Air was that you would ask me, and then I'd be able to tell you pretty clearly, yeah we can do that. No, we can't. Or I see what you're trying to achieve. It might not be possible that way. We might be able to do it this way, but also, I was able to come up to you and go, I've just had this idea about the transformation. Maybe we could do this. Yeah. And then we'd play it out in front of you, and you go, oh yeah, no, that
one of my favourite tips is where, because these creatures start with little balls of fluff, and they roll around the place, and then they open up into these things. And we had this one moment where it was all shot on a plane. So we had loads of these fur balls, and we had these fur balls jumping over the seats. And then the last fur ball was the one where the ears were out, his little mouth's there, and then the final shot was this thing jumping up in front of the camera. And how long did we take to do that?
I have no idea.
At least half an hour, at least, maybe an hour.
There was that one shot which I'd love to have got, which we didn't get, which was a long shot over the rows of seats, and we were going to get one of the fur balls to leap over a seat. Then we were going to throw another one that we had built with the mouth in the oak.
Oh yeah, we did do it. Yeah, we got it.
We got it.
Yeah,
my brain.
I know we practiced it. I mean, the thing is, we did it. We spent like about an hour trying to do it, and we filmed it because I said you got to film it because you never know if it's going to come out or not.
Oh, you did.
And then you were like at the end of it saying, "No, I'm not sure. I said, right, we'll come back to it again." But we got one.
We got one. Okay, cool.
So, and that was a really cool moment because it was kind of a fun thing to do, and.
And that's the other thing about puppetry versus CG is that sense of improvisation on set. Things happen by accident, but you go, that's fantastic. Did we get that? We did. Yeah. Great. All these little happy accidents that you can't really do in any other way.
There's like another shot where the camera is going down the island that's playing, and all these people are backing up, and like they've got a big guitar and they're swinging it around like this, and we've got these little puppet creatures sort of poking their heads up and then ducking as the guitar's being swung around, and it works so beautifully because they've all got. I mean, this one obviously.
This one's falling apart.
Bits, but their eyes glow bright green. So
yes, their eyes light up when they're angry.
Bright green eyes go everywhere. It was just a lot of fun. Absolutely a lot of fun.
And I think that's important. I think as a puppeteer, we do have a lot of fun on set. It is kind of a license to kind of dick around and play. And whenever I'm very conscious of the fact that whenever somebody like Jeff phones me up and says, "Can you put a team together?" I like to hire people that are better than me because it makes me look awesome. And also because it means that I don't need to worry. And the team that we had, Tony I've worked with on a number of things, but Nicola and Alice I'd never worked with before, but they are young, very talented puppeteers who are finding it very difficult to get a foot in the door when it comes to puppetry in movies and TV. So I was like, well, here's a great opportunity for you, something for the show reel, something for the CV, and actually Alice in particular saved our butt a number of times because she was also a fantastic builder. So when things like this happened, she was there with her toolkit ready to repair. And it's just that thing of trusting them. Yeah. Just trusting them. And I did. I was able to go off and do other things or prep for another scene and say to Tony, this is what needs to be done, go and do it. And I know that he'll do it. I don't need to worry about it. So that's a good bit of advice when you're putting a team together. Make sure they're better than you.
I think one of the interesting things when we were shooting was getting someone like Tony in a green suit.
Yes, anemic Spider-Man.
What we do is to make the puppets, if there's a shot that you just know you can't get any other way, we dress someone up in a suit made of completely green cloth. So then digitally we'll remove them from the shot. So we had, I don't think it was this one or the other one.
I think it was this guy, because the other guy had chicken legs.
Right. We had him like just sort of stepping out of the back of the plane, and so we had Tony in a bright green suit behind it, moving it, and then the idea is we'll take him out of the shot later. Otherwise, if we don't, it'll be a shit shot.
It'll look terrible.
It'll look terrible. But it will look great once we've taken him out.
I think that's the other thing, is that technology has moved on so much with computers now. the term used to be rotoscoping when you were getting rid of stuff. Part of the reason we shot the pilot of the Jerry Anderson show was to kind of prove that physical puppetry and the use of computer technology to remove puppeteers, rods, wires, whatever, you combine those two, you've got something that looks absolutely astonishing. And I also think that the reason I'd really like, for instance, the Jerry Anderson shows Finding It Funding, is that I sit in front of the TV now with my daughter, watch CBeebies, whatever, and almost every show is CG. Now I'm not complaining. Some of them are really, really, really good. There's some great. Guillermo del Toro just did one called Troll Hunters, which is on Netflix, which is absolutely brilliant. But it's a particular look, it's a particular aesthetic. They all kind of, after a while, start to blend into each other. And then when something comes along, and luckily CBeebies and certainly CBBC have a history of doing this, live action with puppets, it's interesting all of a sudden because it's completely different. Very recently, my daughter sat and watched Empire Strikes Back for the first time. She insisted on watching the first three first. I tried to steer her away from them, but what can you do? And so she watched Phantom Menace and them, and then she got to Empire Strikes Back, and she watched it and thoroughly enjoyed it. But then she came up to me after and said, "Dad, Yoda," and I was like, "Yeah, he's great, isn't he?" He went, "Yeah, he was real in this one," and I'm like, that's it. As good as the CG Yoda got, it's just not the same as, again, Frank Oz with that little rubber puppet on his hand. There's just something about having something there shot in camera, reacting to an actor that triggers something inside of all of us. I also think, for me as a kid growing up, there was an accessibility to puppetry. You watch something like that, and they used to show making-ofs all the time. I've got VHS tapes full of like the making of Aliens, the making of Labyrinth, whatever. You watch something like that, and you go and you immediately put a sock on your hand, or something like that.
Did you bring your practice puppet with you?
I did bring my practice puppet. I'll get him out. But with computers, the reason I think is that there's a distance. You've got to learn another skill before you can be a computer animator. You've also got to learn how to use a computer. So it's one step removed, whereas puppetry is literally you can just go and pick up a puppet, which is what I'm going to do now if I can find it. This has actually got a Star Wars reference. This puppet is built by, this is called Quinny, and he's a practice puppet, and it's built by a guy called Mike Quinn, who, if you're a Star Wars nerd like me, has been in every Star Wars movie since about Jedi. He played Nien Nunb, the weird puppet character that was the co-pilot to Lando Calrissian. And he builds these and that's it. It's there, you know, and it's its own thing. It's not me. And what I like about this is, when Frank Oz used to do, and Jim Henson used to do interviews on things like Parkinson, whatever around the world, they would just be sat there with Kermit on the end of their arm, or Miss Piggy. Disney, love them or loathe them, what they do now is they're real characters, so they have to build fake sofas, all this kind of stuff. So whenever they're on a TV show, they're real, if you see what I mean. And I remember, I think it was Parkinson that actually asked Jim Henson, aren't you worried that kids are going to see you sat here with Kermit on the end of their arm? And he said, no, because ultimately everything that this guy does is much more interesting than anything I do. So if they're, paying attention to me, then I'm doing something completely wrong. Okay, and I get it as well, because when I've got this guy out with my son, who's 5, now he knows it's me. On some level, he knows it's me, but it's also Quinny. It's its own thing. Kids have this wonderful way of being able to split their brain in half like that and compartmentalise. I know it's Dad, but it isn't Dad. It's Quinny.
I know that when we were at the sci-fi convention, when we had Dave on display. But I mean, Andrew was there talking to these children, and none of them were looking at you. They were all looking at the puppet.
Well, again, this guy, he's so simple. He's essentially he is really just a sock. Puppets like this are fairly unforgiving because their heads aren't built up. There's no internal structure to the head. The only internal structure is obviously in the mouth. So any shape that the head has to come from the shape of my hand. So that's it. And so again, it's really, really simple. It really is just a sock with 2 ping pong balls. It's nothing, but you can do all kinds of things, and all kinds of expressions that you can get. It's again, simple is best. It doesn't need to be. Having said that, the puppets that we had on the Jerry Anderson show were 25 grand a piece, but they were pretty special.
Why is Fergus Scottish?
Because they asked me to be Scottish.
Oh, really? I didn't.
No, it was always in the brief. When I auditioned for the part, they sent me the show Bible, and they had a list of all the characters, and he was always down as Scottish because obviously he's Eleanor's uncle by marriage. Still doesn't make any sense because his aunt's English, but we'll go into that. And one of the briefs was that they wanted him to be Scottish. And initially, part of the problem was I wasn't that confident with my Scottish accent, so I went into the audition. I was like, I can do others, and they were like, okay, yeah, throw some other accents in there. But they really liked my Scottish, and part of the issue was, I found this out later, is the reason I got called in quite late in the game to audition for Fergus was all the other puppeteers were fine in terms of puppetry, but when they did the Scottish accent, none of the American people could understand a word they said. They couldn't get it. So, for whatever reason, I had the only Scottish accent that was understandable to somebody from New York.
Okay.
So that's why I got the job. So
good skill to
that's
have.
a good skill to have. That's down on my CV.
Well, I guess time's almost up. But has anyone got any questions they want to ask Andrew? Yep.
I was going to mention Master Yoda actually. It's interesting you mentioned it because he's probably the finest example of the puppetry versus CG. He went back and forth a few times throughout the whole franchise. And obviously we all know that Star Wars was a super success in the 70s. But the entire sequel relied really on a puppet. It would, as George Lucas said, the whole film would live or die by this one little puppet. If it turns out to be Kermit in the end, then it's going to fail.
Yeah.
Ironically, Frank obviously went on to work on Kermit. But what key techniques do you think, as a puppeteer yourself, that and knowing Frank as you do, what key elements do you think he brought to the character of Yoda to really make it a super success?
I think honesty. I think what you've got to. I'm constantly getting emails, and I don't mind answering them. Because I like to try and be a support for people that are trying to get into this industry because it can be tricky. Saying, what do I do? How do I become a puppeteer? And it ties into what you've just asked. I think there's a tendency for people to think that puppetry is Muppets, crazy shit, and there is elements of that, obviously. But I would say what Frank brought to that part, and what all puppeteers need to bring to their characters, is a sense of honesty, and also you've got to be an actor. You really do. The best puppeteers in the world are really, really good actors. And I look at something, I think Frank's said it in the past, the difference between something like Yoda and Fozzie is acting. Fozzie is a joke. Fozzie is a mixture. It's a character, but it's broad and it's over the top, whereas Yoda is a acting performance, right down to everything that he's doing with his hand, which is really, if you go back and look at it, so tiny. Really, really, if he was to do it in front of an audience here, you probably wouldn't think much of it, but it just because it's on the big screen and it blows up, it's all really tiny and really, really subtle. So I think that, and certainly one of the things that when people email me and say, I want to be a puppeteer, what should I do? The first thing I say is acting classes. It's the easiest thing that you can do right off the bat. You can find somebody, go and do some acting classes, and then, join some Facebook groups. There's the Little Angel Theatre in London. You can go and do puppet workshops there. But yeah, what did he bring to it? Integrity and just a stellar acting performance. I think ultimately is what Frank brought to it.
Was it? Yep.
What do you think? Sort of like puppetry is almost kind of making a resurgence, kind of coming back with the Dark Crystal, Netflix kind of thing. Even in other aspects, like say, for example, within music, if you, for for example, I remember seeing Iron Maiden and they got the big walk on.
That right? Yeah, I know the girl who built that. Yeah.
I still don't know whether he's an animatronic or whether he's like a machine or something like
It's
that.
funnily enough, I know the company that built it. It's not animatronic. It's not a machine. It's essentially just a giant rod puppet.
Right.
Giant rod puppet with performers underneath, with them on massive, great big poles. And again, yeah, I mean, you see that French company that does those huge puppets that go on walkabout through cities. These things are remarkable, and I think you're right. I think there is a resurgence in puppetry. I've certainly noticed it since about, I would say, the 2011, 2010. Suddenly TV shows started getting used again, creatures started getting used again in movies, and again I attribute it to people like Guillermo del Toro, J.J. Abrams, a lot of directors over here in the UK, because they're all kind of our age now.
Yeah.
They're like people like you doing Dead Air and wanting it to be 100% practical puppets. It's that idea that they're now in the positions of power and they kind of want to see what they saw when they grew up and what inspired them. It's like they've just finished the script for the Gremlins sequel. And we're all just horrified at the idea that they're going to use CG, because really what's the point? Half of the fun was the fact that they were puppets and they were there. But in my head, I know that hopefully it'll be a mixture.
Because do you think that like the CGI, say compared to, if you watch Jurassic World compared to Jurassic Park, do you think the CGI is pretty much like the same, or do you personally, because I personally think the CGI in Jurassic Park is better than the one in the recent one, Jurassic World?
I've only seen the recent one recently, so I can't. It hasn't really. It kind of fell out of my head. I watched it. Boom, I've forgotten it already. I remember I watched the original one recently, and yeah, there are some moments where it's a little bit shonky, the CG. But again, that's, it was made 20 odd years ago. Again, I think the thing that sells it is the acting, and also the performance of the creatures, and also there's a lot more practical stuff going on in Jurassic Park than people think. There's actually very little CG. I think they said there's probably only about 7 or 8 minutes of CG. The rest of it is like the raptors in the kitchen when they're chasing our down, so all practical. And to me, that's one of the most effective scenes. The Jurassic sequel is tricky because I think there's uses for CG and there's uses for practical, and I think directors, producers get scared sometimes. There was a sequence in Jurassic World where they've got all the raptors muzzled and they're kind of walking past them. They've got them in cages. Now I know for a fact, because I know a guy on the crew, that they use practical raptor faces in there, and you're like, that's perfect. Yeah, no, there's something for them to react, and I've seen the photographs and they look beautiful. Yet on the film, they chickened out and comped some CG stuff on it, and I can tell it's comped, and I'm like, why make that decision? That seems like a really bizarre decision. But also you have people like Alec Gillis and Tom Woodruff, who run Studio ADI in America, who did all the prosthetics and practical effects work on the Thing prequel sequel, only for it all to get replaced in post-production. And you're like, why? What was, because again, I've seen some of the footage and it's stunning. I think there's just a lack of understanding of the process and a lack of belief that it can still be effective. I'm part of a network at Equity now. We're setting up a Puppeteers UK network at Equity, partly to help dispel some of these myths, because we get pulled into things like commercials very late in the day and they expect us to work miracles, and we can't. That far down the line, it's too late. We're trying to educate producers, directors, that if you want a puppet in your production, you bring the puppeteers, the puppet builders, and everybody on right at the beginning, and then we all work together to give you the best result. Because they very often don't understand what we do. They think we're like actors in that we just come in, we do it to the best of our ability, and then we go home. But very often we're not. We have to be masters. We have to understand, like you were saying, we have to understand green screen. We have to understand how VFX work. We have to understand how it's all going to be comped together at the end. And also, we have to create solutions, like a couple of times on Dead Air, and the Jerry Anson thing, a director will come up and say, I needed to do this, and you go, it can't physically do that. But I know what you want, give me 10 minutes with the guys, and we'll see if we can come up with a solution for you. So we've got to be practical problem solvers as well. And yet, whenever we're being hired for jobs now, especially I got hired for a commercial for Coke recently, they were just paying us so badly. I mean, it was below minimum wage in the end once you added up the days. And you're like, you don't understand what we do. You think we just come in and do it. Actually, we don't. There is a skill. So that equity network, Puppeteers UK, is about just kind of re-educating people as to what practical effects and puppetry in this industry is all about. Cool.
Anyone else got any more questions? No? Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much, Andrew.